Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Apex Legends running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U, and of course this is running with the new 22.7.1 drivers. We're running this at the stock 15 watt TDP at the full 1080p resolution, and the level of performance that we're getting out of here is pretty rough. Our averages aren't even hitting a 30 FPS average, with 1% lows that are dropping down even below 20. So overall, a very rough experience, and I would really suggest that you don't try to play the game like this. I don't think most people will be able to play a competitive shooter like this at these graphics settings with this level of performance. So I would highly suggest that you try something else to fix this, because there are going to be very noticeable stutters and issues and frame rate drops throughout the entirety of the gaming experience, and you're not going to have an enjoyable time. Of course, raising the TDP up to 25 watts does actually improve the performance significantly, where we're finally at a range where it's a lot more enjoyable to play, though it's still not a perfect experience because our 1% lows are still dropping below 30 and our averages aren't exactly that high right now. So in general, it is a pretty rough experience to play, and the fact that the frame times will see these huge waves happen means that overall the experience of trying to aim and even just play the game in general becomes very difficult when you have this inconsistent feel just depending on how fast you're panning the screen. So really the numbers that we're getting here are just showing us that this is a overall rough experience. There are going to be moments where it's going to feel perfectly fine, and then in others it's just going to drop down and it's really going to disappoint you. Of course, the full 30 watt TDP that we can go with the AMD APU tuning utility using the performance preset, you can see here that the level of performance that we're getting is just not good enough. Our averages are looking fine, but it's still those 1% lows that drag down the whole experience. So it seems like the 1080p resolution still is just not doable here. I was hoping that the new drivers would at least improve 1080p to the point where it would be doable, but I would really suggest that you don't play like this, just because those 1% lows are really rough. And of course, this is with 16 gigabytes of RAM, so if you're limited to just 8, this might be an even worse experience. Of course, we can always drop things down to 900p, and here we are running with the stock 15 watt TDP with 900p resolution at the lowest in-game graphics settings. Overall, not really seeing that much of an improvement. We're still at a range that is just not going to be that doable. I mean, going over a 30 FPS average is really just the bare minimum, and our 1% lows are still below 30, and that's really going to make the overall gaming experience just feel really rough. If those 1% lows could actually get up into a bit higher of a range, this would actually be a pretty doable experience, but right now it pretty much toes the line of playability, just because you'll see that the frame times will fluctuate dramatically depending on how fast the movement becomes. That pretty much lets you know that it's going to be a very inconsistent experience while trying to aim, especially for a highly competitive shooter like this. Once we raise the TDP up to 25 watts, though, you can see that the performance increases pretty dramatically here, where we're getting some pretty solid averages where we're almost touching a 60 FPS average consistently, and our 1% lows are now comfortably above 30. You'll see that there will still be frame time fluctuations here and there, but overall it is a very solid experience, and I would honestly say that this is finally at a level where I would find this to be an enjoyable experience, although there will still be the occasional stutter here and there. So it's not a perfect experience, but it's definitely finally at the point where I could say that this is a very playable experience. Though at these lower resolutions, it can be pretty difficult to see enemies sometimes, at least on the dim IPS display of this laptop. Going with a 30 watt TDP actually ends up netting us a nice boost to the 1% lows, where now this is a really smooth gaming experience. You're still going to have the occasional drops here and there, but in general this felt pretty awesome to play. So if you're on a system that actually lets you raise the TDP this high without actually getting into some dangerous territory for the temperatures, I would really go for it, because you actually do get a really nice gaming experience out of this. It's still not as good as you would really want for a competitive shooter, but in general it is very enjoyable. But these are TDPs that a lot of systems with this budget chip just are not really going to be able to handle, because they're not really designed for that. A lot of the times these cheap laptops are really just designed to only run at 15 watts. They're not really spec'd out to be able to dissipate 30 watts of heat. So I would really monitor your temperatures and keep an eye on those in general when you're playing at a TDP like this, because you can actually risk damaging your hardware. And of course, if you can't run at these higher TDPs, we can take a look at 720p to see if that can actually salvage the stock settings, and it does get us a relatively decent gaming experience overall. The 1% lows aren't going to be anything incredible, but they are significantly better than they were at 1080p and at 900p, and they're well within a range now where you can actually get away with playing the game and not really have to worry too much about any significant drops. Of course, this is a very low resolution and it's going to make some long range engagements pretty difficult, but if you're someone that's already used to playing at 720p, you're probably fine playing like this. And in general, it's the fact that the 1% lows are as good as they are that the overall gaming experience here is really rock solid. And of course, if you have the TDP headroom, you can go with the 25 watt TDP, and what that's going to do is actually give you a nice little uplift in both the averages and 1% lows. Not a super significant one, and I was hoping to actually get better FPS than this, considering that we're all the way down to 720p, but this game is surprisingly heavy, especially since it's based off of the Source engine. I'm almost impressed that they were able to make it this demanding. But overall, it is a doable level of FPS, it just all depends on whether or not you can actually game at a resolution this low. But really, you could adjust to anything, so if this is really the only way that you can play games, you can actually just learn to play like this. It's really more about if you're willing to put in the time to learn and just become adjusted to it. And if you do have the headroom to go all the way up to 30 watts, well, you can actually get yourself some really nice levels of performance in terms of 1% lows and averages. Where now if you have a system that actually has a high refresh rate display, let's say a 90 hertz one, or if you have an external monitor, you could actually get away with using some of that extra refresh rate. Of course, it is at a huge sacrifice of resolution here, so the benefits of that might be a little questionable depending on the type of person that you are. But if you can handle this level of quality, you can actually get some nice performance as long as you do have the TDP headroom. If your system is pretty much struggling just to run like this, I would not recommend playing with these settings, because if you get up to the 95-degree temperature, what ends up happening is that it's just going to downclock itself anyway, and that's actually going to cause you to have frame time issues. So if your system cannot handle the TDP, there is no point in just letting it cook itself and then just give you an inconsistent experience. So remember to monitor those temperatures. But anyways, I hope you found this look at Apex Legends to be useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe